Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Alleluia. Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 2nd and 3rd chapters. Glory to you, O Lord. On a Sabbath day, Jesus and his disciples were going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. And they watched him to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Grace, peace, and much joy to you, people of God. He looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. Jesus is in the synagogue on a Sabbath day, being watched by people who take the Sabbath commandment very seriously indeed, to see whether he will break it. Jesus is angry and grieved at their hardness of heart because they see only the law and its requirements and ignore the human need of a man who cannot work with his hands. What they don't realize is that the power of the God of creation, of Exodus, of providence is active in Jesus. His power to heal comes from who he is. He is, after all, like David, the Lord's anointed. In the first of the two Sabbath controversy vignettes we have today, Jesus highlights that. Going through the fields and plucking a few heads of grain for a little snack was actually permitted by God's law. You're not allowed to put the sickle into your neighbor's grain, but it's okay to have a little snack as you're passing through the fields. That's actually permitted by God's law. But the Pharisees were very strict about these things, and so they thought, well, not on the Sabbath. For Jesus' disciples to be going through the fields and plucking a few heads of grain, rubbing the outer part off and eating the grain as a snack, that's work. That's prohibited on the Sabbath. And so the Pharisees questioned Jesus about the conduct of those who are with him. Then in the synagogue, in the second of the two vignettes, those who question Jesus become the watchers. They're watching to see whether Jesus will himself break the Sabbath command. Obviously, they see the man with the withered hand. Jesus sees him too. Aha, they think. Maybe he'll break the commandment right here and now, and then we'll have it. Jesus calls the man into the midst of the synagogue. Is it not more in tune with the purpose of God's Sabbath command to do good to a child of God who is, in whom the image of God has been marred, so that he is not able to work? Or would it be better to just leave him alone and let the difficulty remain? Just leave the problem alone through inaction. They have no answer to that. And interestingly enough, the way that Jesus frames the question, they ought to have an answer, because it is permitted to save a life on the Sabbath day. But to simply heal a man so that he can get back to his work, his ability to earn a livelihood, that, of course, is a breach of the commandment. But the power of the God of creation, the God of Exodus, the God of providence, is active in Jesus. He asks the man to stretch out his hand. He does, and it's restored. Jesus exercises the very power of God. He is the Lord of the Sabbath and of all time. He is great David's greater son. By calling upon the precedent of what David did when he was on the run from Saul, and he went to the tabernacle at Nob looking for bread, and the priest of the shrine says, well, all I have is the bread of the presence, the 12 loaves that are set out as a thank offering before the Lord, which then the priests may eat. David says, well, why don't you let me have 5 of those loaves? And he actually misleads the priest. He says that he's on Saul's business. And when Saul catches up with him, catches up with the priest at Nob, he actually pays with his life for having given that bread to David. But not because of the violation of the command, just because Saul wants to kill David. Just as in the end of the second vignette, as the Pharisees go out and immediately caucus with the Herodians to see how they might destroy Jesus, it's still the Sabbath day. They're not as worried about the Sabbath command now because they see an opportunity to destroy their enemy. Jesus is engaged in a battle with the forces of evil. And every healing he does is a victory in that battle. And a sign for us of God's goodwill for his people, for the whole world. And that's what Jesus says the Sabbath command is. It's a gift of God. Not one more set of rules to obey, but a gift. In the original statement of the Ten Commandments in the book of Exodus, the explanation for the Sabbath command is that God created the whole world and then having created, rested. And he gives us this gift of rest as well after our work. Here in the restatement of the law in the book of Deuteronomy, they call not on creation, but on the deliverance of the people in the Exodus. Deliverance from slavery. Slaves don't get a day of rest. But God says, I brought you out of the hand of Egypt. I brought you out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. I eased your shoulder from the burden, your hand from bearing the load. And so now, this gift of rest is for you. The Sabbath is a gift to people who have to work. And Jesus says that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. That this gift somehow reflects who he is. In 107 AD, Ignatius of Antioch says of the Christians, they have given up observing the Sabbath, and they order their lives by the Lord's day instead, the day on which the light first dawned on us because of his death. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath because of what happens on the eve of the Sabbath on Good Friday when he goes to death for us. And what happens on the day after his Sabbath rest in the tomb on Easter when he is raised for us. The God of creation and deliverance and providence is also the God of resurrection. And so the gift of the Sabbath shows us the rest that we have in this workaday world and the rest that we are promised in the world to come. The death and life of Jesus takes form in the lives of his people, day by day and week by week. As we go through the workaday week and then come to the Sabbath, for us, the Lord's Day, and hear the commandment to remember it and keep it holy. That doesn't mean observing a set of rules. It doesn't even really mean just the cessation from work. We keep the day holy by remembering that our work ends and God's work begins. We cease from our activity to give place in our lives for God's activity. And so each day of our baptized life, each life each week of our life from Sunday Eucharist to Sunday Eucharist, we experience exactly what St. Paul tells the Corinthians, that the power that is in our lives does not come from us, but from Jesus, who is Lord of the Sabbath and of all time. He is the God through whom all things were made. The promise of Sabbath that arises out of creation comes from him. He is the God who came to set us free from our slavery to whatever idols our workaday activities enslave us to. The God of deliverance is in fact Jesus. And it is through him, with him, and in him that God's providence works in our lives. We are, as St. Paul writes, afflicted, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. The death of Jesus takes shape in our lives, but so too does the life of Jesus. The transcendent power that healed a withered hand in the synagogue all those many Sabbaths ago is active in our lives now on the Lord's Day, the day on which the light of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ breaks forth once again for us because of his death, because of his life, because of his rest, and the rest that is promised to us in this workaday world and forever, when the promise comes true all the way. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.